Now, Tim, you are our resident R.E.M. expert.
Really?
I've never knowingly listened through to a whole R.E.M. album. Again, another band that I know are amazing, I know are revered. Fables of the Reconstruction was their album from this year. Go to it.
I've probably only heard this about twice. I mean, I know, God, I know.
Poor. It's very poor.
Automatic for People. I like that.
No, you can't talk about that one.
Up. I really like that.
You've talked about them on other episodes. You've got to talk about this one.
Those. I don't really know it.
Okay, so let's move on.
I heard it at the time. I thought it was all right. Okay. I've heard it since. Thought it was all right. Okay. I was, I quite like Murmur. I thought Murmur kind of stuck with me a bit more.
It's not this
weirdly.
year.
No, Murmur's 83.
No, it's not this year. You've got to talk about this one.
Murmur's got a kind of diaphanous quality.
You've got to talk about this album. You've got to talk about the one from 1985. Otherwise, we're moving on.
Move on.
We're moving on. People
like
can review
Curtis
it.
Mayfield.
People can review it in the comments of the social media and say that we're cloth-eared, that we should. Anyway, the last album we want to mention in the Old Souls is Neil Young's album from this year.
Yeah,
I love it. It's the closest Neil ever came to making a real old-fashioned country and western album.
Yeah,
but it sounds like Neil Young.
Everything did. Was this the album that got
him...
And
look at that cover.
Yes, it's very sweet.
I don't know if this is the one where Geffen decided to sue him because there was a series of albums.
Yeah.
So like he made a rockabilly album.
He did.
Then he made a
and
country album.
Pinks.
And then he made like an electronic album with vocoder trance.
I like trance.
I think that's before this one.
Yeah, trance is earlier. Trance and
so
Neil
can you imagine he goes from trance to a country and western album, okay? It's very Neil.
Yeah.
Which is to say that I really like it. The songwriting rigour is there, as it always is with Neil. But if you don't like country music, you're not going to like it.
Well, I think this is the one that got kind of criticised at the time because his politics had gone quite Reagan.
Okay.
So
that wouldn't have endeared him.
It didn't endear him to many, many people. Like you, I kind of like trance. I thought Neil and the Shocking Pinks, he did the rock and roll really quite well.
I could do without that,
Also, the Blue Note thing, do you remember? I think it was,
yes, that one.
That,
This Note's for me.
This
Note's for you, sorry.
This Note's for you, which is pretty good.
I mean, Neil, he's mad, isn't he? Let's face it, he's mad. But we like our artists to be a bit mad because they're not predictable and they do... I think we've talked about this before, haven't we? How if you are that kind of artist, you are going to be very hit and miss.
Yeah.
In terms of the way you might not or may or may not appeal to your fan base.
Well, he does a year after. Isn't it Landing on Water, the one which sounds
synth
almost
80s.
It's
very
a
80s.
real mid-80s processed album. And again, I'm really glad it's in his catalogue.
Yeah.
A lot of people hate it. I kind of liked it because it was him doing something so unlike his
the 80s
album.
is just bizarre for Neil Young. It's just bizarre. I mean,
ends on a high note though, doesn't it?
Well, it ends on Freedom. Right at the end of 89, he puts out Freedom, and suddenly it's like Neil Young that we kind of knew and love is back. But you know what? Even as I'm saying that, I'm thinking to myself, well, why is that a good thing? Because one of the things that frustrates me most these days is when old gits like us, right, have a new record by an artist that we love, we've been listening to for 40, 50 years. And the best thing we can say about it is, oh, it's really good. It sounds like something they might have done 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and that's a good thing?
Well,
so many people said that about the Stones album, Hackney Down. Oh, it sounds like Ghost Head Soup. Why is that a good thing? Why is that a good thing? And it just shows you how old and stuck in the mud we are as listeners sometimes,
Yeah, I mean, I don't like that personally. I'm really happy when an artist that I loved suddenly comes
You
up with
like
something.
it when Neil does a
I loved it when he
country
did
and
Landing on Water or the Country.
Yeah.
Because that was not what I was expecting.
Come on,
like
this album, Tim, it's got a track on it called Are There Any More Real Cowboys?
Are there?
You want to hear that, don't you?
Yeah.
And Get Back to the Country. You want to hear that? Where is the Highway Tonight? It's a country record. Why not? I mean, there was always a country aspect.
There
to what
was
he did
always.
anyway.
I mean, Comes a Time has got a country.
Love that
element,
record.
hasn't it?
Yeah.
I think the thing is, he was quite adventurous during this period, and I do think, again, Freedom sort of reactivated him commercially and with the critics, but he still did some think of Arc Weld.
He did. He did. Yeah.
He continued to make some.
And
Sleeps
actually,
with Angels, I think, is great.
Freedom has got those noise tracks on it. Don't Cry and his version of On Broadway.
On Broadway, I love that
which
version.
are amazing. And actually, yes, I'm contradicting myself here. They're completely different to anything he'd done before. I mean, okay.
I think do you know why it seems... One, it's because it has a few of his classic style songs. Two, it's got the shape of... Is it Rust Never Sleeps? It's around
Yeah,
that time.
It starts with a live acoustic version of a song, and then the same song ends at the end in electric.
And I think the cover and that conceit made people think... Right.
Yeah.
And I think Rust Never Sleeps was always seen as a high point of his career.
Yeah, absolutely. Deservedly so.
Yeah, great album.
And then after Freedom, obviously, follows it very quickly with Ragged Glory, with Mirrorball, with Sleeps. I mean, he's just on a run through the 90s, which in a way kind of makes the 80s even more fascinating.
Yeah.
I think you were amazing all the way through the 70s. You were amazing all the way through the 90s. And in the 80s, you weren't always amazing, but you were unpredictable. And it's so it's like you say, you're happy that exists in his catalogue.
Yeah,
that it's not just this sort of predictable series of refinements of what came before.
This is it. If you think of Bob Dylan, has he done? He has made creative risks. By God, he has, especially in the 60s, where he appalled his audience. But he's not done a trance. He's not done a Landing on Water. No, the closest he's probably got is confronting his audience with some of his more religious, lyrical content. But you're right, musically it's... Yeah, I mean, like lots of Neil fans, if I'm going for what my favourite Neil is, it's, when I hear Cortez the Killer, I could listen to that track on loop for 3 days.
Yeah, and there's probably a version that is that long, Let's move on, Tim, to a very short category this year. Usually when we talk about progressive rock or pomp and circumstances, we call it... if we're talking about the 70s, there's a lot to get through. Even sometimes if we're talking about the 21st century, there's a fair bit to get through.
Even in the 90s.
There's not a lot to get through in 85, at least not that we're aware of. Marillion released their high watermark commercially and arguably artistically too, Misplaced Childhood. What a bold thing to do in 1985.
Yeah. I think the thing is with Misplaced Childhood, I personally think my favourite Marillion album is the one that follows this, Clutching at Straws.
Me too.
But I think with this, it's almost like, you can hear where they've come from. The first 2 albums, you can hear the obvious lineage of classic Genesis, classic Peter Hamill, some Floyd, and partly because of the neurotic bedsit lyrics that are almost a more elaborate version of what Morrissey's doing in a different way, they've got their own identity. But I think by the time of Misplaced Childhood, they're their own band. This
completely
fits in with a kind of 1980s, very intelligent stadium rock band using a progressive rock concept conceit.
Well, also, I would argue this is a great pop record.
Yeah?
This is a great pop record full of great pop hooks. Now, if you think about all those classic progressive rock bands that Marillion supposedly are in the tradition of, it took them years
to get to that point.
It took them... And some of them never. Some of them never wrote a good pop song. You know what I mean? Here they are, Marillion, 3 albums into their career. And Kaylee is an irresistible piece of pop music.
Yeah.
Lavender. And even some of the more obscure corners of the album, like Milo. Beautiful melody. And I think Fish very underestimated as a melodicist. And again, he's got that Morrissey thing where he's almost approaching music in a kind of idiot savant way. He's not a trained musician. He's not a great singer even, but he is a great vocalist and he is a great frontman and he's a great melodicist.
I agree. And I think that both of them, if I'm right here, I think to a certain extent they used to write their lyrics before their melodies, which forces you to do strange things.
Rhythmically.
And I think Joni Mitchell has done that sometimes. I think if you listen to something like Hijira, there are a lot of words.
Yeah.
And so I think that partly defines it. But you're right, he's quite unusual, partly because of fitting those words into this melodic framework, and comes up with some quite peculiar melodies. But this is strong. To me, it's almost like they're almost in a different dimension on this album and Clutching at Straws. They've improved so much. And this isn't to denigrate the other albums, which I think have got a kind of weird gothic bedsit intensity that I like.
Completely.
But on this, it's almost like they become a different band overnight. there's more of a legato feel in the solos, in the arpeggios. If you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. They're working
round.
They're working with Chris Kimsey, a different producer who's come from. I mean, he's been producing the Rolling Stones, and comes from a very different kind of lineage. And maybe there's a lot more of his influence in the terms of them paring things down, getting rid of the sort of more, old-fashioned archetypes of prog 70s prog rock. I love his lyrics on this record. Some of my favourite lyrics of the whole era are Fish lyrics on this album. I can't remember I can't quote them exactly, so I'm not going to try. But the bit about the primordial spider, and the cave and the imagery, and then there's in Milo, there's the I reach for the bottle and he reached for the door. Just, kind of quite heartfelt, pained sentiments behind the lyrics. I mean, I'm guessing.
Well, also different influences come to play. If you think about this, of course there is an overarching progressive concept, and there are certain influences from maybe Floyd, perhaps. But I hear Townsend and the Who.
Completely.
I definitely hear Joni Mitchell and things like Milo.
Yeah, totally.
And they master it. They do this. Suddenly they've become this really quite subtle, musically sophisticated band.
Yeah. So we're big fans of this album. Now, what about this one, Tim? IQ, The Wake. Now, they wear their Genesis influence very strongly, I think, on this record. I like IQ very much. Even to this day, I think they're a really, really good band, even as I recognise that they are very much still enthralled to 70s progressive archetypes, Genesis particularly. This record I remember really liking when it came out, and I still like it now. Peter Nichols has definitely got the Gabriel DNA in his voice.
Bizarrely, a connection I made is that they are that link between Genesis and the Cardiacs. Because there's something really airless, intense, and relentless about, especially the first couple of tracks on that album. And it's almost like you've taken, what was actually, if you listen to The Trick of the Tail and you listen to Dance on a Volcano, when Genesis are shifting and playing these time signatures, there's a very airy sense of space. In Collins' drumming, there's actually quite a jazz sensibility. It grooves, it flows. This is almost like you've taken that 7/8 riff from Dance on a Volcano or something from Trick of the Tail or The Lamb Lies Down, and you are pummeling at that.
But we've talked about this before, haven't we? That the generations of progressive rock bands, the first generation of progressive rock band, the people that defined the genre, had grown up listening to classical music, jazz music,
folk
the Beatles,
music,
folk music. The second generation, the Marillions and IQs, had grown up listening to Genesis, Yes, and Pink Floyd and Camel. And so it's necessarily reductive. They don't have the same scope and same range, but that's not to dismiss the music at all. But there's something about it that's a little bit more vampiric in that sense, that you're never far away from a Genesis lick or a Genesis cliche or a Yes or a Steve Howe lick or something. And if you kind of go with that and you go with the fact that it does have a more kind of 80s DIY aesthetic to it too, I think you can really enjoy it. I mean, I was 14, 15 years old when these albums were coming out, so I was lapping it up because I'd grown up. I was also listening to punk music and post-punk music. And to me, this is the sound of progressive rock that's come up through post-punk.
Well, which is where I'm getting the Cardiacs thing probably from, the relentlessness. I think 12th Night did that in a very big way.
More overtly so, yes.
Yeah, I think the early 12th Night very much had kind of...
Well, you can hear the influence of Ultravox and things
exactly,
like that.
A lot of electro-pop, a lot of post-punk.
Love that too. Love that band
and
too.
This doesn't have necessarily the post-punk influences, but perhaps it has that DIY
I think it's there.
Post-punk sound more than musical influence.
I think it's there without the meaning for it to be there, but it's what makes it actually... It doesn't sound simply like a knockoff of an old Genesis record.
No, and I think, Peter went on, I think after this album, to do Niadim's Ghost, which is much more of an indie rock band.
Yeah.
I think weirdly, you can hear more of what IQ do with Genesis in the contemporary prog scene than you can hear actual Genesis, because I think that this album in particular, if ever I play at those prog festivals and so on, a lot of the bands
imitating
sort of hearing,
this record.
It's this, it's IQ.
I agree,
actually. So I can see how that neo-prog in some ways, especially something like IQ were a massive influence on the bands that come after.
Yeah.
In the genre.
And as you say, IQ have carried on. The Road to Bones album, I think, is fantastic, especially the title track is
and
amazing.
And I think the thing is they've really, what's interesting is they mine a very similar field in terms of the influences, but they've got so much better as musicians. I think, Nichols was always a really interesting vocalist. He's an even better vocalist now. And I think as instrumentalists, they've got better as well.
I really like him a lot. Supertramp, Brother Where You Bound.
Yeah.
Now, I think I'm right in saying that this is only half of the Supertramp. Roger Hodgson has gone on this album. So Richard Davis is the one left.
Roger Hodgson wrote a lot of the huge hits like Dreamer, Logical Song, Breakfast in America.
And he's gone on this record.
And he's gone, and you'd think that would make them a lesser proposition.
I like this record.
I think it's really
good, yeah.
Because actually Richard Davis did write some great stuff.
Cannonball is a great single.
On Breakfast in America and on Crime of the Century, which I think were probably the two strongest albums before. But this is a really strong album. You would think that the guy, missing the guy who'd written It's Raining Again, Logical Song, you're going to lose a lot. But actually, Davis hones in. It's probably some of his strongest material. Cannonball is a great single. The rest of it really kind of fits because he always had that kind of slightly Randy Newman-esque ballad quality and also almost a kind of Ray Charles blues quality. So the first side, you've got a great single and then some strong Richard Davis songs. Second side, there's a 16-minute epic and a kind of a 3-minute coda.
With David Gilmour on lead guitar.
Really good. I mean,
it's
adventurous,
really
strong. It sounds as good as any Supertramp album. And I like the fact that this is it, that, you lose perhaps your most successful songwriter and a key part of the band's signature sound for the audience. And then you make something that's as confident as that.
But lest we forget that he, as you say, he did write. I mean, although Roger Hodgson, maybe his voice is more synonymous with the big hits, Richard Davis did write. I mean, weren't songs like Goodbye Stranger, that was Roger Hodgson. I can't remember, but I know that there are some songs that were his. So he pulled it out of the bag with this record, I think. And I don't remember it being particularly successful at the time. I think there probably was a sense that...
I think Cannonball was a hit on the continent. I think it was huge everywhere other than here.
Right. One more entry in the Pomp and Circumstance, which is the Magma album from this year, which is a bit mad too, isn't it?
I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. Merci, it's Christian Vander sort of channeling his soul boy. Again, we talked about the Mike's got the spiritual stream of consciousness. There's a lot. There's always some of that going on with Magma, but this is the least operatic album perhaps Magma ever made, and the most soulful, spiritual album they ever made. Yeah,
it's good, somewhere between sort of minimal, classical, chamber jazz. And then this constant repetition of, say, Otis, this kind of soul influence that's underpinning it. It's one of the most accessible albums they ever did.
It's quite acoustic as well, isn't it? Yeah.
If you wanted to play a Magma album to your parents, this would be perhaps.
Or you wanted to play a Magma album to your best friend who only listens to Al Green and
that's your album.
Curtis Mayfield. That's probably the one It's probably the only one you'd have any chance with.
Yeah, it's a Magma album apart, and I like it for that.
Final category, Tim.
Yeah.
We always leave these to last for some reason. We're talking about jazz, minimalist, neoclassical music. They kind of, all kind of get lumped together in a way. So let's just go through some of these records. Philip Glass, Satyagraha. It's one of his operas. I've never been particularly fond of his.
I mean, I love, Koinoskatsi, Adore, North Star,
Music in 12
Parts. Never quite liked
Einstein
his
on the Beach.
Epic. Einstein on the Beach, brilliant. But I think in the 80s, the sound became a bit bloated.
I think he had aspirations to be taken seriously as a serious composer of works, operatic works. And personally, I've never liked the style of operatic singing anyway. So whereas Einstein on the Beach is essentially supposed to be an opera, there's no operatic singing on it at all.
Exactly. It's an opera at a tangent, really, isn't it?
It's a piece of music that uses voice.
Yeah.
This is a proper opera with proper operatic singing. I can't be doing with.
I'm with you. I mean, I love things he's done since. I think he's continued to make some useful work, especially some of his soundtrack work.
Yeah.
But this wasn't my period of
No,
folk
the
jazz.
operas I can do without,
Yeah.
John Adams' Harmonielehre. I never know how you say it.
Harmonielehre.
We love Harmonium, but this is a piece, Harmonielehre. It's like a follow-up to that piece. It's great. It's a great piece, isn't it?
Yeah, I
John
like it.
Adams, always the most traditional sounding of the minimalists in a way. He had this symphonic sweep. You could always imagine.
You can hear that he's kind of coming out of Philip Glass, Steve Reich, Terry Riley, all of this, but you can also hear that he's got kind of Mahler orchestration in there.
Yeah,
there's something more
epic
vast and
traditional.
older, I think. Yeah.
Steve Reich or Reich, we can never figure out what
I
it's
don't know.
supposed
Steve Reich.
Steve Reich, the desert music. Now, I know you love this one, Tim. I love it too, but I think it's, if I'm right, listen to Him are your favourites?
No, to Him.
Oh, you hate this one then. Tim, you hate the desert.
I detest
You
it.
don't.
No, I really like it. Obviously, I do. I mean, I've got everything he's ever done, and I've not disliked anything.
Right.
I can't dislike it. This is one of those that kind of fits in, and I like. Obviously, by the time of Different Trains and Electric Counterpoint, that's another favourite. And because the thing, obviously, with him is that he's got a particular set sound, as we know. And then occasionally he'll do something that comes up from nowhere, which totally redefines his sound, as I think Different Trains did an Electric Counterpoint. And this is a great stopgap album before that. But
it's kind of a Steve Reich album, isn't it?
Yeah, it's exactly that.
It feels like it's cut very much from the same cloth as Music for 18 Musicians.
Yeah,
which for me is the definitive
great album.
Steve Reich album
composition
piece. Yeah. But the desert music definitely holds up that quality, doesn't it?
Sure.
Eberhard Weber's chorus. I've got that record here. I really like that one. That was an interesting little change for Eberhard Weber because it's more use of synthesizer. So he's essentially playing bass and synthesizer on this record, and the only other two people on the record are a drummer and Jan Garbarek on soprano and tenor saxophone.
It's very Spartan, quite different for him, actually. I mean, some of his albums have been Spartan. Obviously, he's done the loop bass albums that are even more Spartan. I like this. I remember seeing Garbarek live this year, and it was disappointing because David Torn, who'd played on It's Okay to Listen to Great Voice, wasn't there. So I saw him at Blue Coat in Liverpool. It was great, but again, it was primarily just seeing Eberhard Weber in the flesh play. Amazing.
What a truly distinctive sound he has as a bass player.
Yeah, and of course he was on Hounds of Love by Kate Bush.
Is he on Hounds of Love? I know he's on Sensu World.
He's on, I think it's Mother Stands for Comfort.
Oh yeah, amazing track. Andrew Poppy is an interesting one, isn't it? Because we talked earlier about ZTT. Now, ZTT were on a roll in 1985. They'd been the most successful label of the previous 3 years with Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Art of Noise, Propaganda. Everyone felt like they raised the bar in terms of production, and they started signing a lot of other acts. And they made a few interesting signings around this time. And Andrew Poppy is interesting because he was a young, serious classical composer. One almost feels like he was ahead of his time because if he came out now, he'd fit right in with your Max Richters and your Nils Frahms. But at the time, I don't think people were quite ready for ZTT launching a classical composer. And I have to say, I don't think the record, The Beating of Wings was the name of the record. It was a minimalist record created in a high production design aesthetic studio environment.
Yeah.
I don't really love it, but what I do love are the 12-inch mixes that came out on the singles. Particularly this one, The Impossible Net, which has an 8-minute mix of 32 frames, and The Impossible Net, a 16-minute track on the B-side. They're both fashioned from the album, but with much more use of sampling and electronics, and I particularly love this record. The album itself tends to be more purist, tries to become more like a serious classical record, and to be honest, it was never going to be up there with the Philip Glasses or
No, I like it, and I liked the fact that ZTT signed him, and also at the time Andrew Poppy was doing arrangements for Matt Johnson and the so I was kind of and he was doing some really interesting arrangements. As an arranger for a pop or a rock band, he could, pull in some very, very.
Well, like I say, I
unusual,
think if he was operating now, he'd probably fit straight in with your Craig Armstrongs and your Max. The people that kind of work in the world of electronic music, or the John Metcalfs, people who work in the world of electronic music, and then go off and arrange strings for someone else, and then do a appear at the proms.
He'd be producing Joanna Newsom or something.
Yeah,
wouldn't he,
exactly.
But I liked it. I mean, I liked it.
One last record. One last record, Tim, before we do our roundup of 1985. And it's one of my favourite records of the year.
Go on.
It's another guy that nominally fits into the minimalist category, except his music, a bit like John Adams in that way, is much more lyrical, much more melodic than that would suggest. It's not reductive in the way that Philip Glass music is reductive, or Steve Reich music is reductive.
Yeah.
Wim Mertens,
okay,
the Belgian composer, Maximising the Audience, which is his first album, actually. It's a double album. What I love about Wim Mertens is that the music, the fabric of the music is essentially minimalist in the sense it's constantly repeating ostinato figures, sometimes played by woodwind, sometimes often played by piano or strings. But over the top of these, he's not afraid to put these incredibly beautiful, haunting, melodic lines, which to me give the music much less of a sense of the academic. They become much more emotionally engaging. This is a masterpiece, this record, for me. It's a double album. 3 of the sides have just one long track and the other side has 2 tracks. There's only 5 tracks on the whole record. So they are very extended compositions. They're very minimalist. The sound of the record is beautiful. There's no 80s-ness really to the record. It sounds very organic, very timeless. The first track on the record, Circles, which takes up the whole of the first side, starts with just a 2-note woodwind figure. Every 2 or 3 seconds, do-do, do-do. And then gradually, you know the record. Gradually he adds in a 3rd note and a 4th note. And he's gradually building up this kind of snaking woodwind line. And then finally, once this line has established itself, he adds this most beautiful, haunting... he has this kind of falsetto voice, which he uses to great effect. He adds these beautiful melodies over the top. What's your take of this album, Tim? Did you know it at the time?
I think you probably played it to me, and I've always liked what I've heard of Wim Mertens. It's never been, in my favourite list, if you got your favourite minimalists, but I really liked it. Obviously I was naturally inclined to that type of music. But what is interesting is that, Arvo Pärt, who was also gaining traction around this period, was immediately a kind of a Radio 3 regular, and as spacious and sometimes simplistic as some of his music could be, he was resolutely a classical composer. Wim Mertens, I don't know, what label was he signed
Well,
to?
that's interesting. I was just going to say, because he actually comes from a post-punk kind of background.
Yeah.
He was on Le Disque de Crépuscule, which was affiliated with Factory Records. And yes, and he's working with... And he began, I think I'm right in saying he began in a post-punk rock band. So he's come from a completely different direction.
Yeah.
Possibly never been classically trained. And he really had aspirations to be a serious classical composer. Some of his later works are massively far too... There's one piece, I think, which takes up 37 CDs. And a few years later, he was making 12 CD sets for solo bassoon.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't get in with it. But here... There is a pop sensibility. There is a pop, and I think it is something to do with what I said, which is that he will put these beautiful melodies over the top of what is essentially academic minimalist music. So he is quite unique in that respect. And at the time, he would have been really on his own.
Yeah, well, it's like in my mind, I kind of put him in there with people from Tuxedo Moon and so on.
Yes, that same label.
Right,
Same
so
label.
it's this kind of, it's flirting with post-punk, flirting with minimalism, classical ideas. So strangely, I see it as being a more rarefied version of what 4AD were doing or what Dead Can Dance
could easily
were
have been on 4AD, yeah. Could easily be on 4AD. It would have been probably the most organic and least reverb-heavy thing ever released on 4AD. But yes, I know what you mean. Yes, he's a fascinating character, and I think possibly because of where he came from, you're absolutely right in saying he's never been taken as seriously by the classical cognoscenti as perhaps he should have been. And he does seem to appeal more to people that like rock pop crossover than people that listen to chamber music or classical music.
And I think it is all about label, all about marketing in certain cases.
Well, so much is, isn't it? Yeah. So much is.
Well,
so much is about perception.
If Max Richter had come up through that, would we be seeing Max Richter as the classical composer? Because, obviously Max Richter, in some ways, I see him as directly coming out of Eno more than I do Shostakovich.
Yeah, and much like I was saying, with Andrew Poppy, I think if Wim Mertens came out today, he would fit straight in.
Yeah.
Straight in, and he'd be doing movie soundtracks.
Yeah,
he'd be doing soundtracks for shows on Netflix and what have you. And maybe he is doing that in Belgium. I don't know, but this album at this time would have been a real anomaly, a real square peg in a round hole. And I think I discovered it because I found it for 49p in Record Tape Exchange, and a double album. I thought, oh, that's good value. Yeah. 3 side-long pieces. I wonder what that's like. But I absolutely would recommend it wholeheartedly to almost anyone that loves good music. Okay, Tim, 1985, that's it. That is it. 1985, what a year. The year of Live Aid. The year that the compact disc becomes the dominant physical format, at least that's the way in my memory. And a year of fantastic, music, particularly from the kind of art pop, scene. The same question as always, Tim. Your favourites, and the records you feel the most, or the record you feel is the most influential in the long term.
Well, I think one of the things that's kind of interesting here is that we're going through this year, and I always remember certain mid-80s productions being very, very similar. And yet when we're going through these albums, you couldn't get more different than Wim Mertens, The Smiths, The Hounds of Love.
Actually, Robert Plant's Shaken,
whatever it's called,
yeah.
Shaken and Stirred, or what have you. So actually, it's surprisingly diverse. And certainly when I like what I hear in this era, it's that thing where I still feel very close to it, if you know what I mean. That this was music that I remember being really excited when it came out, whether it's Spleen and Ideal or Hounds of Love, or even, Walk Away by Sisters of Mercy. This was music that immediately gripped me, excited me. And when I listened to it, there's almost kind of a sense of, coming home. It's like, oh God, I remember this was an era that felt good, despite the fact, as I've said, my initial perception being that 1985 was perhaps more staid than 84 and 83 and 82.
I'm surprised. Yeah, I am surprised because, as I say, I always had in my mind, I think I said right at the beginning of this recording, these episodes about 1985, I always had in my mind that Live Aid was the watershed moment when everything went to shit. And, of course, now going through this list, you see it was just as fascinating a year as any. Maybe it was the following year that the rock began to set in. I don't know if we've done 86.
We have done 86, yeah. Colour of Spring.
Colour of Spring. You see, there you go, straight away, an argument for the defence. But I was surprised. How good
same here. And I guess in terms of sort of overall album that I've probably played more than any other and will play again, I guess it's got to be Hounds of Love as a favourite. But, equally those ZTT releases, Slave to the Rhythm and A Secret Wish Propaganda, expansive, beautiful pieces of work. There are so many diverse albums from this year I could have picked. And as we said before, the Smiths album, striking album in its own way.
What about most influential, would you say?
I think this one's really, really difficult because you can only talk about Kate Bush having a curious afterlife with her use in the soundtrack of Stranger Things, and that suddenly becoming one of the pieces of 2023 because of that.
Yeah, I think that's an anomaly, isn't it? Yeah.
And it is an anomaly. Yeah. And I think that because of that, it's possible that, the likes of Taylor Swift or the likes of Lana Del Rey listened and heard something. So there's been a curious afterlife with Hounds of Love, and perhaps in some of the quirkier American singer-songwriters, or even, Wise Blood, or what have you. Perhaps there's a curious afterlife of Kate Bush in.
I don't really hear it, but yeah,
I don't. I get speculating.
I get
because
fed
of
up with every quirky female singer-songwriter being compared to Kate Bush.
Yeah.
And I love Kate Bush, and I love a lot of this singer-songwriter, but I think it's lazy. I think it's lazy.
It is, and I don't necessarily hear it. I'm just wondering that because of its ubiquity last year, you know, maybe some producers are listening.
Possibly.
Because even now it's a shockingly innovative production.
It is, no doubt, yeah.
And would have sounded, you know.
So you wouldn't pick that, and I agree with your reasoning for not picking that as influential. What is influential?
This I'm not quite sure, because I think it's, you know, unless we're missing quite a lot. I mean, there might be a lot of sort of industrial metal albums and sort of hip-hop progenitors where they're producing a sound that you can still hear in contemporary music.
Well, see, I'm gonna posit something to you here, that actually the most influential record of this year, possibly not for reasons of the music, but in terms of the industry, is Brothers in Arms. Because it, much like, as you pointed out, Dark Side of the Moon did for stereo hi-fi, what this record did for compact disc, that's not to be underestimated, because compact disc was the dominant format. It still is, actually, for all the people that say that vinyl is... compact disc still is the dominant format, just about, I think. It became the dominant format, and this is the most significant thing, changed the way people thought about albums.
And changed the album itself.
Changed the format. So for me, I'm going to say Brothers in Arms, nothing to do with the music, but just the fact that it popularised a format which influenced the way people thought about albums, the way thought about music.
Okay, I'm going to go then for that. I'm going to go for Thursday Afternoon, because it was created specifically for CD.
Also a good...
And again, popularised the format amongst people like me. You know, I would have wanted that album and therefore wanted the format. But also, I think you can still hear echoes of, you know, of what Mertens, Poppy and Eno were doing in soundtrack music now. You know, that's something that hasn't necessarily dated. If there's a quality Netflix or Amazon Prime production, you're going to hear music that has that lineage.
For sure, but I don't think that's something peculiar to 1985. That's something...
No.
Pick any year. Pick any year between 1970 and 1985 and you probably find out.
I suppose the thing is, you're not going to hear the sound of Hounds of Love or Songs from the Big Chair in anything that's popular now. As great and revolutionary,
Birdie,
and successful as those albums.
Birdie is you know, in terms of a soundtrack album, it's very much like the way we think about soundtracks to Netflix shows now. Birdie, there's a lot of that in that album 40 years ago, you know.
Again, his sense of sound design on that album is great.
Yeah. I'm going to go, as for my favourite albums of the year, I'm going to be very, very scattershot here. Hounds of Love, Songs from the Big Chair, Steve McQueen, Cupid and Psyche, love them all. Secret Wish, adore it.
Actually, Steve McQueen might be my most played album.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Yeah, you know.
Spleen and Ideal, Dead Can Dance.
Yeah, great.
Meat is Murder. And Wim Mertens, Maximising the Audience, is my favourite minimalist album from the year. And I love it, and I still listen to it very regularly. So there we go. What a year. How many episodes do you think we've got there,
I think
Tim?
we've probably got about 10 episodes out of this one. And we've got to remember as well to say, if you like this, please like it, because apparently it improves algorithms.
God, that's the most apologetic demand.
Please, if you like it.
Come on, you've got to be a bit more American about this, Tim.
Yeah?
If you've got to demand the listener go and give us a 5-star review, not like,
I wish I could do that,
Rick.
I wish I could do that Rick Beato thing. He does it with such style.
Go leave us a 5-star review.
Yeah. Leave a 5-star review.
Leave a 5-star review.
Say like.
Yeah, or give us a 1-star review.
This is what keeps it. You know, you've got to listen to the bonus ear for listening book.
The bonus.
Yeah, the bonus ear for listening book, which we will be selling if you look under the credits.
That's more like it.
Yeah.
Now, what innovations are coming, Tim? Well, we're going to try and... We're obviously videoing this again today. The next innovation... We haven't done readers' letters for ages.
We've not done readers'
Let's
letters.
not do it now, because we've already gone on for 37 days on this.
Yeah.
But we're going to have to bring that back next episode. And also, we want to try and implement the listeners' 15-second soundbite review, don't they?
Yeah.
So what we could do is we could publish a list of some albums we're going to discuss, and then they could send in their own little preempt, and then we could feature them in the episode.
Yeah.
That sounds like fun, doesn't it?
We could do that.
Yeah. So somebody could send in a really glowing review of an album that we're about to completely trash, or vice versa.
Or vice versa. Of course.
Anyway, thank you so much for listening. As always, myself and Tim will be back with another year very soon. Thanks for now, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.